I never thought of myself as a dangerous person. I wasn't violent, and I didn't enjoy hurting people. But I did enjoy control. That was the problem. Years ago, before I got my life together, I spent almost 2 years running scams across small towns and rural highways. I learned quickly that lonely places made people vulnerable. People living out in the middle of nowhere were too trusting, especially older folks. My scam was simple. I would pretend to be stranded. Sometimes I'd say my truck broke down. Other times, I'd claim I was trying to get to a hospital because my brother had been injured. I'd change details depending on who answered the door. Once they let me inside, I'd rob them. I rarely used weapons because fear alone usually worked. I told myself I wasn't as bad as real criminals because I never wanted to physically hurt anyone. Looking back now, that's just the kind of lie people tell themselves so they can sleep at night. One winter night, I drove into a tiny town buried deep in the mountains. The place barely looked real. A single gas station, a closed diner, and maybe 20 houses spread across miles of frozen roads. Snow had been falling lightly all evening, covering everything in a pale layer that reflected the moonlight. It was the perfect place for someone like me. Quiet, isolated, easy to disappear in. I spent almost an hour driving slowly through the roads looking for the right target. Eventually, I found a small farmhouse sitting alone near the edge of the woods. There were no neighboring houses nearby, and only one dim porch light illuminated the front entrance. I saw an old truck parked beside the house, and smoke coming from the chimney. That usually meant elderly people lived there year-round. Perfect. I parked my car a few hundred feet down the road so it wouldn't immediately draw attention. Then I rehearsed my story in my head while walking toward the house. My plan was to say my car slid into a ditch and I needed to call a tow truck. Simple, easy, reliable. When I knocked on the door, it took almost a full minute before anyone answered. Finally, the door creaked open, revealing an older woman wrapped in a thick gray sweater. Her face looked weathered, but not weak. Her eyes immediately unsettled me. They were sharp, alert, like she had been expecting someone. Before I could even start my fake story, she smiled and said, "You finally made it." The sentence caught me off guard. I awkwardly laughed and explained about my car being stuck. She listened quietly, nodding slowly the entire time. Then she stepped aside and invited me in without hesitation. The warmth inside the house hit me instantly. A fire crackled loudly in the living room fireplace, and the smell of old wood and something rotten lingered faintly in the air. At first I thought maybe it was spoiled food or mildew, but the smell seemed stronger near the hallway, leading deeper into the house. The woman closed the door behind me and told me her husband would help with my vehicle. Something about her tone felt rehearsed, almost too calm. Most people in these situations either panicked or bombarded me with questions. She didn't ask anything. Then I heard heavy footsteps upstairs. A massive man slowly descended the staircase. He wasn't old like I expected. He looked somewhere in his 30s, maybe early 40s, with broad shoulders and long, greasy hair hanging around his face. His expression was completely blank. He held a lantern in one hand and a hunting knife in the other. The woman casually introduced him as her son, Caleb. Every instinct in my body immediately told me something was wrong. Caleb stared at me for several seconds without blinking. Then he smiled slightly and asked where my car was parked. His voice sounded almost excited. I pointed vaguely down the road and told him it slid near a ditch. He nodded once and stepped toward the front door. But before leaving, he whispered something to his mother that I couldn't hear. That rotten smell suddenly became stronger. I glanced toward the hallway and noticed another door slightly cracked open near the kitchen. A dark stain stretched across the wooden floorboards leading toward it. It looked old, almost black. The woman noticed me staring and immediately shut the hallway door. That was the exact moment I decided I needed to leave. I told her I forgot my phone in the car and started backing toward the front door. Her expression changed instantly. The smile disappeared from her face like a switch had been flipped. "You should stay warm," she said quietly. Then I heard the front door unlock from outside. Caleb came back in much too quickly for someone supposedly checking a car parked far down the road. Snow covered his boots, and he was breathing heavily like he had been running. He looked directly at me and said, "Your tires are ruined." My stomach dropped. I pushed past both of them and yanked open the front door. Caleb grabbed at my jacket, but I slipped free and sprinted toward the road. The freezing air burned my lungs immediately. I could already see my car in the distance. As I got closer, panic flooded through me. All 4 tires had been slashed open, not punctured, destroyed. I spun around and saw Caleb standing near the porch holding the hunting knife. The older woman stood beside him smiling again, except now the smile looked wrong. Wide, unnatural. Then the porch light suddenly shut off. Everything went dark except for the moonlight reflecting off the snow. I didn't wait another second. I bolted straight into the woods behind the house. The snow made running difficult. Every step sank deep, slowing me down while branches whipped against my face. Behind me, I could hear Caleb crashing through the trees. He wasn't trying to be quiet either. It sounded like he wanted me to hear him coming. At one point, I slipped down a small hill and smashed into the frozen ground hard enough to knock the breath out of me. I stayed there for a second, listening carefully. Silence. No footsteps, no movement. Then, somewhere deeper in the woods, I heard laughter. Not normal laughter either. It sounded layered, like multiple voices laughing together. I forced myself back up and kept moving. Eventually, I spotted an old hunting shed hidden among the trees. I rushed inside and slammed the door shut behind me. The shed was tiny and smelled strongly of rust and damp wood, but at least it gave me somewhere to hide. I crouched there in complete darkness, trying not to breathe too loudly. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps outside. Slow footsteps circling the shed. Then Caleb's voice drifted through the walls. "You picked the wrong house." The footsteps stopped directly outside the door. I held my breath so hard my chest hurt. Then came another voice, the older woman. "We told you to stay inside." After that, silence returned. I stayed hidden for what felt like hours. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I must have drifted in and out of sleep because the next thing I remember was pale morning light shining through cracks in the shed walls. The woods were completely silent. I slowly opened the shed door and stepped outside. Snow covered the ground, untouched, except for one set of footprints leading away from the shed toward the farmhouse. I followed them carefully. When I finally reached the road again, my car was gone. Not stolen. Gone completely. There were no tire tracks, no debris. Nothing. The farmhouse was gone too. I stood there, staring at an empty snowy field where the house had been the night before. No porch, no truck, nothing. I honestly thought I was losing my mind. I walked nearly 3 miles before finally finding another road, where a passing driver picked me up and took me into town. When I tried explaining what happened, nobody recognized the description of the farmhouse. An older cashier at the gas station looked uncomfortable after hearing the story and asked me where exactly I saw the house. When I described the road, his face went pale. He told me a family used to live out there decades ago, a mother and her son. According to him, both disappeared after authorities discovered human remains buried behind the property. The house burned down sometime in the late 1980s. I never told anyone the full truth about why I was there that night. Maybe that's karma. Maybe I walked into something worse than myself. I don't know. But I'll tell you one thing. After that night, I stopped running scams completely. Because every now and then, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I still hear Caleb's voice in my head, whispering from outside the shed. You picked the wrong house.